March 22nd, which is a Saturday morning at 10. Not too early.
That was the 23rd.
Hopefully the perfect time. It'll be a nice day, but not too nice. There's no baseball yet, right? We'll be inviting the public back. Hopefully we'll get 100 people again.
Is that on Saturday or?
That's Saturday.
Yes, the 23rd is.
Third.
Saturday.
Yeah.
23rd.
All right, 23rd.
It's definitely the 23rd, Dylan.
23rd.
10 o'clock.
And April 1st?
That's just a
Is
joke.
that
I'm
right?
kidding.
We're hoping.
We're kidding about that.
That's a Monday.
Anyway, so this meeting, as it says, we're focused on what we call a shared fact-finding process, which is designed really to allow us to talk about which facts are we confident in, which facts are we worried about and need more information, and basically say, what do we need, what information do we need to make good decisions about Upton Center that allow us to move forward and get past any arguments about what's true and what's not true, etc. Or we may just, in some cases it might be a matter of what's true and what's not true. In most cases it's probably, we don't have enough information. Like what's really happening with traffic and where is the edge of the wetland really? So what we want to do tonight is really focus on not necessarily understanding all the information because we have a ton of maps and stuff to go over and you're probably going to take a while to absorb that, but to really focus on what information do we need and how do we make good decisions based on each sort of theme of information that we have. So that'll be tonight. In a couple of, 3 weeks? On March 4th, we'll have another meeting where we'll really sit down and think about what is our values for the center, what do we want this place to be in a general way, how, do we really understand how the site works now and how it could work in the future, what are the key problems and opportunities that we've identified that really need to be resolved. So this is sort of, like you can't come to the right answer unless you ask the right question. So next meeting is really thinking about what is the right question for this place, and do we even know what that question is? And then we're going to talk about planning for the public workshop on the 23rd. And then following the workshop, we'll come back and basically sort out all the different ideas that came out of the workshop and the ideas that you will have and that we will have, and literally probably put those up on the wall and sort through them and try to see if there's a single overall vision that seems to incorporate all of those ideas, or do we have conflicting ideas that need to be resolved. And then on April 8th, we'll come back. That's just a week later. So that'll be good. So we'll sort of look at the alternatives and come back the next week and really try to make some decisions about which direction to go. And then to present that to town meeting on May 2nd. Any questions about the process or comments? As I said to kick off, we'll try not to waste your time in any of these meetings. We'll get promptly underway, more or less, and promptly to finish by 9. And so tonight, as I said, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. And so what we don't finish tonight, we're going to sort of pick up again at the next meeting. But first, what are we doing? Oh, yeah, we brought the maps again. And one of the things I want to say is we asked people generally what they thought of as the boundaries of the center. And people, what basically, as you enter here, you sort of feel like you're entering the center and then coming up to here again. It's what people sort of think of as a historic center, I guess. For our purposes, there's really no need to define it too precisely, but we're really thinking about all of the areas that are influenced by and are influenced and do influence what happens in the center. So that could be any place within walking distance, any place that generates a particular use that has an influence. It could have something to do with the environment or the ecology, upstream or downstream. So we're not quite sure about that yet, but it's a question that we're going to continue to be asking and wrestling with. We doing this next? No, we're going to start with a little icebreaker to see who's in the room. And Dylan is going to lead us through that.
All right, so this is a little complicated.
That's not a good way to start an icebreaker.
You might totally fail. So what I wanted to do.
Can't totally fail.
Can't totally fail. The goal is basically to learn each other's names. The purpose of the working group was to be representative of Upton as a whole. So we want to get a sense of who you represent. Like maybe you're a resident and you feel like you represent all the residents of Upton, or maybe you're a resident of a particular neighborhood. Or maybe you're an older adult, or maybe you're a young person, or maybe you're a member of a particular board. So we want to get a sense of who you think you represent, what interests or groups in Upton, and your name. And rather than just have you go around in a circle, which would be simple and sort of boring, I'm going to call out a group to begin with, okay? If you are a member of that group, I want you to stand. And also what other boards or interests you represent. And we're going to write all of those on the board, okay?
Just the groups, not your name.
Just the groups.
Right.
And then when you've said your thing, you sit down, okay? And then we're going to take the list that we picked up from there and call out the next one, and those people stand up. And so hopefully we'll get through all of you, and we'll get through all the groups that you represent. So part of the idea of this is you can see kind of which groups are most represented just by how many people are stood up, and which ones don't have very many representatives. So let's start with the Economic Development Committee. So there are 4 of you here.
Okay. I'm Gene Burnett. I'm the chairman of the Economic Development Committee. Previously, I've worked as chair of the Open Space Committee, during which time we purchased the Steffens Farm, that purchase effort, and also the open space zoning bylaw was pursued by us and enacted. My role as chairman of the EDC, and particularly in this regard, is primarily to make sure that the public is the driver of this process, that it's a public vision, not a vision by any particular interest group, but that everyone is heard and everyone is represented, because the only way this is going to happen is through consensus. If we get to town meeting without a common vision, you've all been to town meeting before, and you know that this effort could stall or completely reverse. So the goal for me is that you understand that you're engaged, that we get through the process well informed, and that you are actually ambassadors for the process to people you know, so that when we get to town meeting, you can all stand up and say you were heard, and say it was a public process, and be engaged enough to state your opinion at that time.
All right, so you can sit. You said open space committee, open space groups. So the kinds of things that Gene just told you about sort of why he's here and what he values, I want you to hold on to those because we're going to get to those later. So for now, I want to do this as quickly as possible. And I think what will make it fun is if we do it as quickly as possible. So just your name and any groups you're affiliated with in as few words as possible. Donna?
Hi, Donna Desjardins, and I'm a member of the Historical Commission
All right.
and a longtime member of the town.
I'm Steve Rackerton, member of the Cable Committee, this committee, the ADC, and the Technology Committee.
An electronic vote?
And the Electronic Voting Committee.
Hi, I'm Michelle Antonelli, member of the Electronic Voting Committee, which is newly formed. And I really feel that I'm here to represent the needs of individuals with physical, sensory, and intellectual impairments. So, disability rights, if you want to put it that way.
Disability rights. All right.
Disability access.
Disability access. Is anybody else here from the Open Space Committee?
Mike Penko, Conservation Commission, Open Space Committee, Land Stewardship Committee. Both those, Open Space and Land Stewardship, are both subcommittees of the Conservation, and also the Community Preservation Committee.
What was it, Open Space Committee?
Open Space Committee, which is got up above.
At top.
And CPI, Community Preservation. All right, Historical Commission, anybody else from there?
Hi, I'm Catherine Worsham, and I'm on the Historical Commission with Donna. and I'm also a resident in the center of town, so.
All right. How about the cable committee? Nobody else? Okay. Technology committee? Electronic voting committee? Disability access? Conservation commission? Community preservation committee? Town center residents? What was that?
I'm not currently on the community preservation committee, but I did serve on it. Is that wrong?
Okay. Why don't you tell us who you are and what else you serve on?
Ellen Arnold. I am a member of Upton Historical Society and the Friends of Upton State Forest, although the forest group probably doesn't have that much to do with this. I have in the past been a member of CPC, the 250th committees, the local cultural council. I've served as a work for taxes person for several town committees, which includes the FinCon, Code, ConCon, and the Upton Historical Commission. Longtime resident since 1973, and you might say I'm a senior. I don't think I'm a senior yet, but maybe I'm looking at that end of it. So.
All right, so we were on town center residents.
Susan Nolan, 7 Church Street, so we're just behind the United Parish. And we've been there for 18 years. We're actually a butters.
The not so smart board. Old-fashioned board.
Yeah, no, my name is Mari, and I'm also a resident of 18 years and a butter to the town center.
I am and live in the local neighborhood right behind the town hall on Nelson Street for 31 years. In the Historic Society, library user, a library trustee, senior citizen, and I can't think what else. I'm not sure what else. That's it.
Library trustees.
Library user. I don't know if that matters.
Users and a senior citizen.
Have seniors down there.
Okay. I'm going to skip town center residents for right now. So Upton Historical Society, anybody else from here?
Yeah.
From there? No. How about the Friends of Upton State Forest? Ah, Owen.
Hi.
You guys can sit because you've already spoken.
Yeah, I'm Owen. I've only been here for 15 years, but again, that's really all I've been around.
Never left town.
Yeah, I'm a friend of the Upton State Forest, and I just kind of thought I'd get involved because it's a really cool thing to do.
Okay. So long-term residents. You guys get to define that how you want.
Long enough.
Ann Petruski,
I guess you don't have to, do they have to say that more than once?
I'm curious, so if you fit the group that you've already spoken, it's nice if you stand so we know how you fit. But
When
then
you
can
say
sit right back
long-term,
down.
do you mean you want to be here long-term?
No, you've been here. All right.
well, Ann Petruski, I guess I'm a senior. Moved here as a kid. Was here for a while. Left, came back. I've been back about, I don't know, 20, 25 years. I'm a senior. I don't want to get booed out, but I'm kind of here to represent the people who think this isn't a very good idea to begin with.
Great. I hope there are more of you in the room who think it's not a great idea.
Hi, I'm Bethany. My parents built my house in 1986, and I just recently moved back and bought my childhood home. So, and I also wanted to say, I don't know if this is related at all, but I've heard the veterans come up a bit and people concerned about the VFW. And we're actually an active duty military family, so I thought that I might represent that.
I'm Craig Weinfuss. I'm kind of in the same boat as Bethany. I lived here as a child, and then I lived in Amherst for about 10 years in Florence, and then moved back, bought my parents' house, so same situation.
Mike Pinko again, but 22-year resident.
Okay.
Yeah, 1973 resident.
Okay.
Wait for this one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've lived here quite a lot of years, and I now live in the family home. And I'm just interested as a resident to see how all this goes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Oh, Carolyn.
Nice to meet you. Okay. Butters, neighbors, library trustees. I think we've gotten to butters because we did immediate neighbors. Library trustees? Or anybody who's a library user? All right, there we go. You're all here for the library. So, if you've already said your name, please sit. And if you haven't, remain seated, standing. Okay, so.
My name's Molly Smith. I did not grow up here or anything like that, but I am a PTO member. I serve on Memorial's school council as well. Yeah, 3 kids. Oh, and I'm a coach too.
So Brad Lamont, I am not a long-term resident, but a returnee. I did high school here, moved here as a freshman, so moved away and came back, have family in town. Again, parent, library user, and hopeful that things might change.
I'm Sarah Bell, also representing, I would say, young families in Upton, also a working mom.
Jeannie Brooks, lived here just short of a year, represent seniors as well as a library user. Hoping the library is going to improve and we have a decent, I hate the word term senior centre for whatever. Yeah, just hoping that I think this is a good idea and I hope it moves forward.
David Brooks with her, also just under a year. And you skipped seniors, but we represent in Rockwood Meadows, we represent the vanguard of about 550 55 plus seniors that are coming to town in the next few years. So that's going to be a significant polish, and I think we'll be talking about that later when it comes to opportunities and what we bring.
I'm Kara. I'm a new resident. I have 3 young children. We use the playground. My oldest goes to Memorial, so we use Memorial. 2 of my younger children use the daycare at Little Learners. That's at Misco Hill Middle School. A library patron. We use the sports facilities at the VFW field, the baseball field. Hopeful.
Thanks.
I'm Greg Manning. I moved here 2 years ago after living 40 years in California. And I'm a member of the VFW and library user and also on the Council on Aging.
Caitlin Andrews, I've lived here my entire life, so basically 29 years. I'd say library users, and I grew up, and I probably represent those who would love to move back, but if I didn't live with my parents, I couldn't afford it.
Jessica Curran, fairly new to town, been here almost 3 years. Little kids not yet in the school system, and part of the young family committee, if you will, and hopeful for some change.
I have to say it's amazing to have so many young families here because that typically is the group that doesn't come to meetings like this. I'm a parent of young children myself, and I don't go to meetings unless I'm running them.
My name's Diana Bebo, and my husband was a longtime resident here, and we just moved back about 4 years ago and purchased a property on 24 Main Street. And I'm a landscape architect and urban designer, so I'm very excited about this development coming to town. And my kids, I have 2 kids, they love the library, they wish it was in better condition, and we're frequent users of the park and the VFW fields, and I'm hopeful for change.
Amy Correa. I've been here for about 17 years. I have 2 kids in the school system. Fundraising director for Nipmuc Football and Cheer. My house is not in the historical district, but it's 120 years old over on High Street. Most people recognize it by the bumble crawling over the fence at Christmas time. So that's and hoping for change, or hoping to make things better.
All right, so who hasn't had a chance to yet?
Antonio Casasana, representing younger families. I'm a new resident of 3 years. My wife's been here for 20 years, I want to say. And yeah, just hoping for change.
Dana Nero, I've been here for about a year, grew up just across the border in Milford, spent a lot of time in Upton growing up, and decided to move here last year, representing young families.
Hi, I'm Steve Sayre. I've been here by next Monday will be a year, here at Leapack, Massachusetts. So I'm just here to, something I like to do is this sort of thing based on some experience I had in my previous job.
Hi, I'm Paula. I've got 2 daughters, went through all the school system. One of them is still in it, and volunteer for the fire department, the fire association.
Hi, Justin Pollard, new resident as of a couple years ago. This is my wife Kelly. She's from around here for a long time, but I'm new to the area as of 2 years ago.
Hello, I'm Kelly. I grew up in Mendon my whole life. I went to Nipmuc and we live in Upton for 2 years now. And this is Amelia. We're representing, I guess, the young families as well.
She's a lifelong resident.
She is. So Justin and I both work for Considerably Construction in Milford. He's a project manager on multi-million-dollar projects, and I'm a proposal manager. So I'm very involved in the public procurement process and pursuing projects, whether it's working with architects or designers or competing with other construction companies. That's kind of our background, so we're pretty interested in this as well.
Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Dan Lazaris, lived in town 22 years. I'm on fire and EMS. I'm the chairman of the capital committee for the town. I've been on many other committees in the 20 years I've lived here. Like them, I work in the building design and construction industry as an engineer.
All right, I think we've gotten everybody. Thank you for entertaining me. So, does anybody feel like there are groups or people missing from those of us who are assembled?
Are there any business owners?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I hate public speaking, and I'm new to town as of late August. So, but I do own a small business, stationery.
I think the another group that's not represented here so far are senior citizens, of which I'm one.
Stand up.
You got plenty of consider yourself a senior citizen.
Stand up, senior.
Yeah, if you think you're a senior citizen.
I think there's 2 definitions. There's people over 55 with energy and activity, and they're here. And there are people who are shut-ins, who need assisted living, who are probably not here but are still parts of the town.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she said she doesn't like the word seniors. It has the other connotation.
Yeah.
We're active adults.
Yeah. I call them older adults and older adults.
But thank you for making the point.
Anybody else think that there are people missing who we should be recruiting? And when I say we, I mean you. Police and fire.
And I think we could have more representation from the VFW and Upton Historical Society.
We have commission and a couple of society members here.
Yeah.
There's
How about-
1, 2, and 3.
Are there any educators here?
My dad actually will be here, Bill Andrews. He's just
Educators.
not able to make it.
The other is Recreation Committee.
The other one that I see missing is the Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals.
My dad's also on the ZBA.
Perfect. Where is he?
Unfortunately, there was a grand family dinner planned about a month before we volunteered, so when it's tonight. So you'll
You're
meet
missing
him,
out.
but not him. The rest of you may know him as Mr. Move the Question, If you don't know, okay, see, there you go. He's the one to make sure things aren't going on too long.
I think you can refer to him as our lifesaver during annual town meeting.
Okay, yeah, that's also it.
So do you want to do the honors and move the question?
Yeah, can we move the question? I'd like to make a motion, then we move the question.
Anybody want a second?
Second.
All right. So next up. I think
Well, the
we're-
remote's there.
Yeah, but we're going to go through the other. All right, so we wanted to just go through a little bit of the past work that's led up to this process. We touched on this in the last meeting, but for tonight, we want to give the opportunity to talk a little bit about it and for people to ask questions. So we looked at what seemed like the relevant past plans, which is the 2005 master plan for Upton. There was a 2007 open space project. There's an open space and recreation plan. There's a 2012 housing production plan, 2019 complete streets prioritization plan. So those are all, if you haven't been involved in them, they're all significant efforts that townspeople like yourselves went through. Some of them with consultants, some of them just doing it on their own. And in general, they have similar recommendations. Obviously, they diverge because they have different focus areas. But in general, there's a recommendation that this part of the town have a mix of uses. When I say a mix of uses, I mean a mix of residential uses and commercial uses. And in this case, probably also municipal uses like the library or the town hall. There's a recommendation that the street or the road be improved. Both the portion that people drive on and intersection safety, and also sidewalks and amenities like benches and lighting and so on. There's a recommendation that came out of several of these plans for shared parking. I think that was focused mostly on town uses, and there has been some implementation around that. I think some parking lots were built. Diverse housing, including affordable housing in different sizes and types of units, meaning small apartments, big apartments, single-family houses. Updating the zoning came up several times, and like I said before, adding amenities. Do you guys, I think a question I have is, do any of those plans strike you as plans that didn't have a lot of public input, weren't endorsed by the public? Do any of these seem like things that are coming out of left field based on your experience in the town?
I'm just curious about the Complete Streets prioritization plan. Was that a public process or something that you done?
Or is that the TIP project?
So I can get into that later. I don't know whether Derek?
So, my name is Derek, I'm the town manager. I'm just here to provide technical advice when it comes up. So the Complete Streets project was a grant that the town received a couple of years ago, and we hired an engineering firm, I think it was Beta, who did a complete analysis of all the streets in town, and they recommended about 24 streets that the town can then go ahead and seek state funding to receive grants to improve those streets, to create bicycle lanes, widen the sidewalks, make them more pedestrian friendly. That's separate from the TIP project. The TIP project is an $11 million project that's funded by the state that is going to improve the street, sidewalks, and bicycle lanes everywhere from, think of the West Upton at the set of lights, so Hartford Ave North, moving to High Street, and then all the way up to Hopkinton Road, and then end at the town line of Upton and Hopkinton. So that project was slated to begin in the spring. It's now been moved to 2020, but that's going to be a complete overhaul of that entire stretch, and it's also going to create an intersection exchange over at Pratt Pond at the corner of Westboro Road. So that's an $11 million project, fully funded by the state.
Is it online, that plan?
The TIP project?
No, the Complete Streets.
Probably not, but we can put it online.
Thank you.
Yep.
In answer to your question, and it might just be me, I don't think any of those had a lot of publicity. I mean, the best way, I think, to get information out is if the town crier can succinctly summarize what the ideas are. I don't mean to be out of it, okay, and maybe I am, and everybody else recognizes everything, but that's a thought.
So in the back and then in front.
I'm just gonna agree with her is that I think if you are part of the project or you have interest in the project, you're aware of, you know where to look for any meetings, whatnot. Other than that, if you do submit to getting the emails from the towns, like the automated emails, you'll get some information. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be very well displayed in the Upton Town Crier. But I think that's really more of like, people aren't aware of it. And I'll say, just as an example, say for the TIP project, people who live on the street where the construction is going to occur, they had no idea this project was occurring. Like, I mean, granted, they could be living under a rock. They didn't know it was occurring, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so some of these projects were going back 14 years. So that's a long time to remember what's going on. Gene?
We haven't had any community-driven action on diverse housing, updated zoning, or mixed use. Mixed use and diverse housing are driven by the developers who come into town, and it's not driven by the community. Updated zoning is always resisted. There's a small core group that gets involved in the zoning efforts, but there's no comprehensive plan or community-led drive to updated zoning.
I would just have to disagree that there wasn't publicity about these because I was aware of most of them, and in fact, Dodson, your company did the open space project, and it was well attended, and there were several public functions. The TIP project,
That
even
one
though
had an excellent public process.
yes, it did. And the TIP project, I don't live anywhere near that, but I was quite aware of it and had seen it on cable and had seen it in the paper, so I went and attended a meeting or two, even though it wasn't going to impact me. So I have to say that I think it's unfair to say there wasn't publicity. I would say one that isn't there is I believe there was Community Preservation Fund did a rec plan a few years back, and I don't know if that was updated or not. And there was an Affordable Housing Committee because there's CPC money for that. They were quite active for a while. I thought they had produced something on community or affordable housing, so
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
the
sure.
housing
Is that what it
production
is? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There is a open space and recreation plan for 2011, and that includes the recreation master plan I think Ellen was referring to.
Right.
It doesn't have a lot to do with town center, but you know, it does discuss things like you know, community trails and things like that that might have some.
Yeah, I've looked at that, and that's actually included in your.
Yeah, but CPC did fund a separate recreation plan. When I was on the committee, I had a copy of it. I gave it off to whoever. So there is one floating out there. And the master plan, you can see that in the library. The open space project is online.
Okay. Just one more, and then I want to move on.
Two questions. Has the 2005 master plan been updated at all in terms of a master plan? And if so, or even if not, has the EDC's work on getting this project off the ground taken that plan and basically looking at, I would assume and hope, that they're extending that master plan, some of the thoughts that may have been put in there?
So the first question does anybody know if the master plan has been updated at all?
No, it hasn't been, but there are components of the master plan that are currently being activated right now. So the Recreation Commission hired BSC Group out of Worcester, who's been working in the community, holding public forums just like this, going back to last fall, to develop a recreation master plan. And a lot of these items we're talking about today all feed into the 2005 master plan. So there's components of the master plan that are currently being updated.
There are efforts right now on a number of different fronts. EDC is kind of trying to gather a bunch of loose balloons and bring them into some sort of comprehensive and cohesive plan. Updated zoning is part of it, diverse housing is part of it, and mixed use is part of it. So as far as updating the master plan, that's related and is certainly being looked at, but it's not the primary driver for us at this right now. This is the primary driver.
I think reaching out to this has been a real effort to reach out to members of the community to bring in different ideas rather than just sit in a 5-person or 7-person committee and make decisions. That I think that making a real effort to get different ideas and different. It's always exciting to get different ideas.
Yeah, and I think
this is really the first. I've lived in town a long time, and this has been it's been a plan to bring people in, and we've worked on it.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing is that that information also needs to go out from this committee to the rest of the community, so that people aren't saying that what you did was not publicized and not open and not discussed.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to, sorry to interrupt, but one of the purposes of this working group is so that people can see that there's someone representing their interests who has been involved. Because we all know it's really hard to get to meetings because everybody's working. If you have kids, you're working twice as hard. It's hard to go to meetings. So the idea is just to have representation for each of these groups at this meeting. But one of your role, whether you choose to accept it or not, but we hope you will, is to then reach out to other people on Facebook, on your PTO website, whatever it might be, and inform them that you are part of this. If people have an opinion, they could contact you to, of course, invite them, especially to the public workshop on March 23rd, etc. So we're hoping that you will take that upon yourself to represent those interests, but also to serve as a conduit of information and engagement.
So I would love to move on. Is it essential?
I think it might be. It's not part of there, but because it's going to be talked about as part of this whole process, I think maybe I should mention that there have been 3 attempts already to build a new library in Upton. So there was one that was a joint public library with Mendon that failed and Mendon passed here, so it didn't pass. And then there was another one that we got the grant from the state, but it didn't pass in the community. And then just a couple of years ago, we tried to do it again, and we weren't able to get land that was appropriate for it, so we couldn't go forward with it. And now there is a plan to rehab the building that it's in, just to get it handicapped accessible for the first floor, and also another possible plan to renovate the whole building of 3 stories and have the historic museum in it. So just for information, those exist, and I guess they're probably available either through the library. Yeah, so I thought it's maybe good to know.
All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you guys, this is the summary of what came out of the meeting we had a couple weeks ago on this project. And it's either on the town website or it will soon be on the town website, so you can see it in a version that's legible to you, unlike this one. But basically, the comments that we heard in the meeting notes, I think, were relatively aligned with the kinds of things that were in those past plans, right? So the kinds of things that people liked in the town center that they said drew them there were the library, the town hall, the various businesses in town center. The things that they called out as being problems were a couple of intersections, the lack of sidewalks here and here, molds and handicap accessibility issues in the library. And then the opportunities were often similar to where there were things people liked. So people like the common, and they see it as an opportunity. Some people like the historic look of the old church, and they see it as an opportunity site for something. And people see a lot of opportunity in the parking lot that the town owns here. And also, apparently, it's a great place to turn around. Here to go here, you have to come up here, turn around, and then go back there. So you can look at this online. In general, you know, when we went through the various words people used to describe the town center, there were far more of them that were negative than positive. So that's something that I think is important. It was sort of like 2/3 negative, and then the remaining third was split between positive things and sort of hard to tell whether they're positive or negative.
Could I just add something? Sorry.
Sure.
I think it's important that we remember, because the community spent money in several years hiring a consultant, but that is, much of the area we're talking about is a historic district now, and some of the buildings we're talking about are contributing. So it might be worthwhile also to include in your list of documents the application for the successful National Register, and understand the boundaries and where that is.
Yep.
And to have respect for that too, I would say.
Yep.
So, I just had a quick question. So regarding historical buildings, houses, is there set rules just on how, if we're deciding whether or not to knock it down versus repair it, are there certain rules that, just so we're aware of it, so when we go to this planning, we're not jumping the gun and then realizing after the fact that that wasn't even on the table?
Does anybody from your local historic groups want to answer that?
From the Historical Commission, that we do have a demo delay, we do have a demo delay law in town. And if, or I'll use an example, 14 North Main Street, a residence that I particularly loved, came to us, you know, the builder came to us and wanted to take the building down. We delayed it, but we delayed it because we basically we wanted to meet with the neighbors. You need to have an open meeting. And the neighbors showed up in full force and wanted the building gone. I mean, we just sat there and we got really beat up. So we allowed them to take, you know, we said, yes, you can go ahead and take the building down. And that's the demo delay. The Historical Commission decides if there should be a delay in taking it down. And if they decide that there will be a delay, then you need to have an open meeting on this where people can come in and express their opinion. There is nothing that says that a historical building in the historical district can't be taken down. The town hall is the only one, and I think the CCC camp is the other one?
That's a similar district. So this, I want to just say, don't use the word local historic district, because in a local historic district, you can prevent them. In a historic district such as this, you can tear it down, you have to go through the demo delay bylaw, but the benefit of having a building like this is that it gives you a status in applying for grants. If you change a building, such as was done in the block next to the Holy Angels, when they took the third story off and changed that structure, this was years ago, but they took themselves out of eligibility for getting grants. So that's something you need to keep in mind.
I think that's the point, to keep
Yeah.
in mind, but the buildings
Right.
are non-protected in that they can't be taken down, they can be painted purple. So there aren't any laws, is the wrong word.
What the EDC is trying to do is get the facts that are necessary to make these decisions. So during this process, we will have an engineering study done on the church to determine its viability in any use. We'll have lead and asbestos assessments done on the church and as well as the library. And we'll be able to present to you what the actual cost of doing things that might be necessary to preserve or to remove, so that you have the decision-making tools that you need.
So I was going to say, because we did this ourselves in Ashfield with our old office, but because it's in a National Register district, the owner can apply for tax credits for renovating. So for the church, if you sold it to a developer, that developer then, because it's in a historic district, could apply for the tax credits, which can be very helpful.
There's also an organization called Preservation Mass, which I reached out to when I first heard this, and I'd be glad to share the links. They sent me a huge link. I haven't even finished looking through all the examples of what can be done with rehabbed buildings and churches in particular, because churches are tough. And they gave me a couple other resources I'd be glad to share at some point if you want.
Could I just make a follow-up to something Dill said about the, at the meeting? And I may be all wrong, but I kind of doubt that the majority of people in Upton don't like the town center. I think there was an incentive for people who didn't like it, which is fine. They're certainly entitled to their opinion. But personally, I doubt that the majority of people in town find the town center unacceptable. I know you're just reporting what you heard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no idea whether
Yeah.
they find it acceptable or not. All I can say is that when given the opportunity to describe it in one word, the majority of them chose words that were negative.
Yeah.
Well, can I just maybe clarify for him? He was just stating the people at the meeting,
Right.
and not all the
Well,
people in
that
town.
was
Yeah.
what I was trying to get across, the difference. Yeah, thank you.
Between the people at the meeting versus
The
Upton
whole
in general.
town.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
The cup is definitely half full. It's just got to keep it getting fuller rather than emptier.
All right.
Right?
So
Question mark.
when Gene started and he told you why he's here and sort of what he wanted to get out of this process, I said that I wanted the rest of you to hold that. So now is your opportunity to tell us, why are you here tonight? What do you want to get out of this process? What do you want this process to accomplish? And I want to hear from somebody who I haven't heard from yet.
I'll start. All right.
Great.
So, in our little breakout group, which I think you were in, we had a couple of people that were like 70-year residents, and they talked about how awesome Upton was. And I think if you look around this room, there are a lot of young families represented and a lot of young residents. And I think that the vision that they had of West Upton and Upton Center is something that we all desire. And it's not what it was. And I think we want to bring it back potentially to what it was for those citizens, for the people that are here.
An example, safely walking downtown with your kids. Like, things like that. I think, like, I don't think we necessarily, like, when it comes to the history, like, I think the vision of downtown is beautiful. I think it's like, I feel like we're missing the, like, I think we see the potential for even paint or, you know, things like that, or safely getting downtown with our kids, or parking with our kids, safely getting into a library with our kids. So, and I think you're right, like, we picture it probably back in the day, where you could just kind of walk around and be safe.
Crossing 140 is not something you really want to do with a child, so there's the safety of that. And on top of that, I see it as just bringing the community together. Like, I like the downtown, I love the look of it, but I would love to be able to also get some commercial benefit out of my town, where I can go to a store and pick up a little bit more than the super's giving me, or sit down and have a sandwich with my child and run into someone I haven't seen in 5 years, and we've only been here for 10. But allowing for more industry to come to town, little small businesses, so it's helping our taxes as well, because I've been here for 10 years and I've seen what the taxes have done, and I think there's opportunity to bring more small business to the town, so it's helping at our tax rate as well.
In particular, like beyond like the traffic controls and everything like that, like making use of the abandoned buildings and bringing some economic viability to the center, making it a place that people want to gather, so residents can come and not just have cars fly through the center, and have it be a place that you want to be.
I don't know, I just kind of want to be honest. I mean, it's kind of already been touched on before, but I mean, you kind of look at photos of how Upton kind of used to be. I don't know, I kind of feel that, I don't like the fact that I look at that and I kind of feel like I missed out on something. I mean, like, I don't really speak for everyone in the room when I say this, but I mean, it's not really a secret that Upton kind of went downhill. We used to have a trolley, for crying out loud. That was really cool. So, like, I don't know. I mean, you used to be able to walk in the street. You used to be able to, like, we had a whole hotel, and the first floor was, you could, like, watch your boots being made. We used to make, like, a third of the boots in Worcester. And then the second floor was hotels, and then there was a theater on the top. I'm pretty sure it burned down, so there's really nothing you can do about that. But, I don't know, I just kind of feel like we could maybe start going back uphill, as opposed to just kind of sitting at the bottom of the hill and saying, what am I going to do?
At the 23 January meeting, there were 3 goals, as I recall, when this whole project was sort of introduced. And one was reduce or increase the tax base by attracting some business, getting cars that zoom through the center on 140 to slow down and maybe even stop, spend their money, then leave. And then the residential piece. And then basically trying to recreate a quaint, stereotypical New England village around the center. Some of those, I'm not sure they are all interdependent on one another. If you want businesses or the tax base to grow, that's all throughout the entire boundary or incorporated area of Upton. Now, certainly the downtown, if you want people to stop for, as she mentioned, that'd be perfect. But in terms of a quaint New England village, personally, the town common looks like a grassed-in traffic island because of its size, its location, and its shape. If you're driving on 140, you may not even recognize that as a town common. So those are, I think we have to look at, if we're trying to make the center look better and attract some of this other stuff, which in turn then feeds a lot of these other desires. But the town can't, like the zoning board, that's singularly, if you make it easier for a developer to come in because you've eased up and changed your zoning laws, you will attract some of the other businesses, light manufacturing off on, what is it, the west end of town, I guess. So
I've got in the back.
So I think it's not necessary, I think people are getting nervous about we're gonna destroy the town or destroy the center. I think it's really, you said it was a village. And if you look at pictures from, say, 70, 80 years ago, downtown Upton was a village. So it's really just more about returning it to its former beauty, but in today's design. So if you look at, say, Hopkinton or Holliston, the center of town, they haven't taken down all the historical buildings. If any new ones are built, they're all built to the same style that the original buildings are. Everything's cleaned up. There's a lot of cosmetic work done. So it looks really nice. I mean, you go down there, it's not like, say, Lexington or anything like that. We just want it to look nice. As somebody who lives on High Street, and when they put that speed trap out and you see 70 miles an hour registered at least once a day, you know, that putting either mechanisms in place that slow down the traffic so that it's not turning into, you know, a speedway. It's supposed to be a village.
I think I hear say that we want a place to look like it's 18th century and 21st century at the same time. And you can do that. Norfolk is another example. They thoroughly modernized the downtown without changing the central nature of a town that's very like this one, but they did it 20 years ago. And I want to see ways of keeping the town looking 18th century in a way, but having somewhere that will attract its residents to go downtown, to hang out, to stay there and not go through there. Which is what a lot of people living on the edge of town, the edges of town are growing fast, will be tending to do. I want to bring the edges to the center so we can hang out, meet our neighbors, and do things in the middle of town in more modern looking buildings.
Like someone said that you don't necessarily do one to the other. I might disagree a little bit on that. For example, what was that store that was in the yoga place before it was the yoga place?
Common Sense.
Yeah, I loved Common Sense, but we never. Yeah, no one. I mean, there was always a person or two in there when I walked in, but just not enough people stopped. Not enough people were attracted to the town center. Like for example, I drive to Millis to go to church. I love that they built their library and then they built some extra businesses and there's some residents there. So it's not just that you have the businesses to go, oh, the liquor store. It's that there are already people there and there's a library there, so you have a true center where people are attracted like, you know, honey to sugar. So I think that's one of the things we like to do with the center is not only just get businesses to move in, but people to stop, or not even people to stop, but just places so we're not driving to other places because we always draw us to Shaw's and now it's Price Chopper, or, you know, oh, I want to do some shopping or window shopping, and just let's go down there. But right now, there's nothing there, and even when there was, we couldn't support it. So I think we definitely need to get residents there too.
All right, so I think the last comment on this.
I think she makes a very good point. In fact, I was going to bring it up. But first of all, I'd like to say what's wrong with two town centers. We have West Upton, which it seems to be successful, the businesses that go there. And we have the community center, you know, the civic center, call it, town hall, library, churches. You know, you could put other, like, I won't call it senior center, community center, things like that in the center. But from 1973 to now, I can name 2 florists who were there and couldn't make it. I can name at least 2 bakeries that were there. I know one didn't make it. I'm not sure what the situation was with the other, why they left. I can remember an auto parts shop where you could go in and pick up parts. I can remember a hardware store up the street hardware stores can't survive in towns right now. I think the reality of some of these things that you talk about wanting are they're not going to make it. You know, they've been tried before. They haven't made it. A Little Common Sense was a gorgeous little store. She had a great idea, and she got a core group of people that would go in. I used to go in and buy things I didn't need just to support her. But there were, like you say, there were 2 people there, and then she might stand there the rest of the day waiting. So, you know, it's fine to say bring businesses, but people have to support them. And in order for a businessman to put up his money or to get a bank loan, he's got to prove that he can support this. So I think we have to be practical about it, too.
So start with the community centre and
You guys,
further from that.
as a group, do you want to move on to the next thing, or do you want to keep on talking about this? Those of you who want to move on to the next thing, raise your hands. Those of you who want to keep on talking about this. All right, so
Just
a couple more-
quickly.
couple more comments then?
I just think that when we have a great library that brings families down, and when we have a great community center that brings families down, they're going to be looking for some place to get a cup of coffee or a meal or to spend some time. And we haven't had that. We're kind of a drive-through. But now we have a phenomenal school system. We have BVT. Now we should be a destination. And yes, we have the commercial down in West Upton, but I think there's some room for some nice, vibrant, but old-fashioned maybe, but vibrant kind of thing. Or I don't know if old-fashioned is the right word, but what would fit now? But you just need a place. If you're going to bring your kids downtown, you got to take them for something to eat. And if a senior citizen is going to drive downtown, they're going to want something like that too. So I think that if we invest in this community and we bring it up, the business will be more
I think the
successful.
community centre is coming out as an anchor in our thinking. That start there and then stuff will go around it. And children's playground together.
So, like I said, I think this is a great discussion. It would be nice to see that the community explore a lot of options.
Yeah.
You know, being in the building design construction industry and working in the architectural and planning side of things, you really got to get a bunch of options on the table for people to consider and look at. They need to be real. They need to be understood graphically. I mean, there's a lot of underutilized land in the middle of that town center. And in the big scheme of things, one of the things that I would hope to see is not just a discussion about making sure there's a whole bunch of options that are considered, but how do they connect to the other things in the community that are going on? And we got open space land that's down at the bottom end of Grove Street that's not that far down there. How do you eventually see the connections to some of those things and think much longer, 10, 20 years, so the community has a game plan? Because being on the capital committee, one thing I've learned very quickly is we don't have a lot of capital folks. So at the end of the day, we need to be thinking about how this community wants to spend its money 10 or 20 years from now. Because we don't raise enough taxation to do planning shorter than that time frame.
So my perspective is the hopefulness and bringing some aesthetic beauty to the center, taking what we already have, preserving it, and raising it up to the next level. Something I took away from our first meeting was hearing from the people who've been here saying, we've tried this, it hasn't worked. We've tried this, it hasn't worked. So my fear is, what do we do differently this time so it actually can work? And something someone said was, let's go slow. So we know what we want, like you just said, let's look, what do we want for 20 years? Because I'm going to be here for 20, 30, 40 years. I want this to be successful, but I realize we'd have to start kind of small. We have to do a few core things first, and then keep building on itself. And it seems like the community center is a great way to get all age groups involved, and then that can start building. So instead of throwing everything in this first 5 years, start small, beautify, and then keep building. But we don't want to make mistakes that have been made before. We want to keep going. And I think, yeah.
I think part of the goal of the process, and part of the thinking of the EDC, is that any kind of economic development downtown, any kind of revitalization needs a basic toolbox. And the toolbox starts with zoning and it starts with a vision. So what our thinking is, and why we were proponents of this process, was that through this process you'd identify the things that were important to you. Then we would create the toolbox from a regulatory perspective through zoning and other mechanisms that would be used to attract business. Because no business and no developer likes uncertainty. So the purpose of the end product here isn't just a vision, it's to create certainty for a developer coming into the project that he knows I can do this, this, and this, the town is going to support it. I'm not going to be here for 2 years fighting every resident in town to try and get my development in place, my commercial or residential development in place. So keep in mind that although we're shooting high, there's a subtext of, we understand there's a reality here that needs to be met, and that certainly sending people in the design build area would be very helpful in helping us reduce the uncertainty. So, because we can't do this all as a town. We're not going to redevelop downtown on the taxpayer's dollar. It's going to have to be done through public-private partnership, and public-private partnership again requires certainty.
I just agree with the young lady who just spoke that, and I understand what Jean just said, but I think you're a lot better off to begin small. I mean, when I said I'm not in favor of this whole idea, I mean the eclectic nature of it. I mean, I'm in favor of a library, I'm in favor of a new senior center. I'd love to see Warren Street just shut off. No going into or out of Warren Street, and then you just have cars coming from four directions like any other intersection. So anyway, I just wanted to be supportive of the young lady who spoke previously, even though I did hear what Jean said about the eclectic nature. I hear developers and I get nervous.
Can we move on?
Just like to say, the lady who mentioned safety, I think that should be a #1 goal. And at least in our group, there are a couple of very good suggestions in addition to Warren is changing the outlet of Grove Street. And the person who made the suggestion showed a very good way it could be done. So I think that safety and traffic issues, you have to look at that as a first priority, because if you have something wonderful, if people are going to get killed coming to it, you kind of beat it yourself.
Great. Do you want to go to the other slideshow?
Is that what we're doing?
Yeah,
Let's do that.
Huh.
I won't say now for something completely different. A little different. So we wanted to, so we've learned who we are in a little bit. We haven't drilled down very far. We know who's in the room, who we represent. So talk a little bit about our goals for the process. And again, I think those are very important things to do with this first meeting. And then what I thought would be useful is to talk about sort of trends in downtowns over the centuries, if you will. What's happening around the state now, and give you a few examples. I mean, I was very interested to hear some examples like Norfolk and other towns that we'll look into. I brought some examples of other towns that have been doing things. Just to sort of introduce the idea that this is possible. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can go slow, you can go fast. Usually it's slow because the market takes a while. But the whole purpose of this process is to try to get a sense of whether it's slow or fast, you know where you're going. And if you're ready to do something, either as a developer, as a resident, or someone who's just looking out on their sidewalk, there's a plan that says this is what you can do today. So this is you've heard about lifestyle centers. It's kind of the new shopping mall, a place where you can live and work and eat and play and all that. Of course, main streets were that. We didn't have shopping malls. We had main streets, and that's where you did your working and playing and your business and your spiritual life, your community life. Everything was bound up in this small place, and it was all organized by basically where you could get on foot or on a horse. And so the original centers were all sort of literally the center of town, and towns were literally created because that's how far people had to go to get to a town center. Of course.
Excuse me, was that the 3 stores that we have in the center of town now? Was that the church
Yep.
to the left there?
Yes.
This is what, yeah, what
It's a
used to
record
be
shop
there.
now.
Yeah.
Right.
These people are no longer there. That we know of.
I see one guy.
They're elderly. So, as you know, of course, our main streets started to decline really with the growth of automobile traffic and the growth of the suburbs. And you had, this wonderful thing called a supermarket where you could park your kids outside, just as you do today. You can go in and meet your neighbors and be elegantly dressed as you pick out your lettuces and so on. And that grew into, Shoppers World, where it was just like the same idea. Let's bring everybody in from the whole region because we've just built these giant super highways that let us get down to Framingham and Natick really easily, so we can meet all of their needs at once. And it's sort of shopping, but it's also shopping as entertainment, but mostly for just one thing, which is things you can buy, right? Not services so much. And of course, that had a predictable result on every downtown in the state, and in New England, and in the Northeast, where you no longer needed all these small local shops and all these businesses because those were centralized. And it made a lot of sense economically because you can buy, even today, you can buy things a lot cheaper at a supermarket than you can in a downtown store. And of course, now we have the internet has come in. So here's the percentage of all retail, 0, 5, 10, 15%. Here's department stores as a percentage going from 15 down to 5 since 1992. Warehouse clubs and superstores, which we originally were the first things we were worrying about killing off downtowns, have been going up and then leveled off because of this line, which is the internet, right? Electronic shopping and mail order. So now it's, not only are, our older department stores failing, but the warehouse and big boxes, which we thought were going to be the great, not the great thing, but the thing for the future, are now also disappearing. Here's another one that shows another trend, which is eating out. So you have department stores declining. This is between 95 and 2015. Internet rising, but then eating out taking off in a huge way, which corresponds to the fact that, the previous generation, a large percentage of couples, somebody stayed home with the kids. Now everybody's working, pretty much. So what do? You come home and, well, the discussion. Are we going to pull something out of the pantry or are we going to run down the street? And so you have whole new genres of food that are responding to that need. So it's almost cheaper to go out and buy restaurant food than it is to go to a supermarket and bring it home and cook. And then, of course, you have the malls, which came in and replaced the downtowns, are now themselves being forced out by these larger regional and nationwide trends. So Sears closing. And then you have places like Shoppers World, where they're looking at this as their solution. As Shoppers World type of shopping malls gets less business, they're saying, let's bring in housing to bring more customers in and turn this into a mixed-use center. So this is actually a proposal from last year at Shoppers World, is to have the apartments, and they have built already a lot of apartments, but then to put a sort of a podium of retail, restaurants, and entertainment, a bowling alley in the basement. And then what's really interesting is that over the last 20 years, developers are turning from a traditional shopping mall to something which looks more like a main street, which again is where you start to get to that lifestyle center idea of, this is in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, off Route 1. let's build a main street, we'll have parking on the street and nice wide sidewalks and beautiful Main Street buildings with shops on the ground floor, offices and apartments above them. So the developers are chasing this market to try to bring people to their suburban locations, because that remains a cheaper place. A big suburban site remains a cheaper place to build something than to try to shoehorn it into an existing center. And so this is that South County Commons. It also includes apartments in the back over here and this Main Street. But otherwise, it's a suburban shopping mall, right? It's got the Route 1, you turn in, there's this nice Main Street. Otherwise, it's like big boxes, a typical sort of shopping mall hotel in the back. And other than being able to drive through it, it's not really that much different than a typical shopping mall surrounded by a parking lot. And they try to make up for this by having a little park space at the end where you can sit in the traffic circle and listen to the band. Which is either wonderful if you grew up in the suburbs and never had
across
this.
the street.
Yeah, it's either wonderful or it's really pathetic. I'm not quite sure. This is another one closer by in Wayland, where this is an old Raytheon factory just off the center of Wayland, and they actually turned it into this, which is again based on traditional downtown principles of let's create a main street, let's have a mix of uses on the main street, have some residential close by with a park, and more residential over here. We'll have the Stop and Shop, but we'll try to integrate it into the community. And so when you're walking on the streets, what they're very intentionally trying to create is this sense of a nice walkable main street with 2- and 3-story buildings, but also a mix of different uses. It's not just retail, but it's also medical uses and other kinds of services and places for professional offices. So again, this is sort of the development engine moving toward trying to provide these mixed-use centers. And of course, a lot of attention to try and make it traditional detailing, make it nice at night so people will go to the restaurants. Having a lot of restaurants as a proportion because of that rising demand of people who want to come home and go out to an inexpensive restaurant. Well, relatively inexpensive, I suppose. And then a lot of focus on programming. So these are some of the earlier pictures of parks that they had designed there. And this is the park sort of in between the town center and the Stop and Shop. There's this big green where they have the bands come and play in the summer. Now this is, speaking of going slow, this is something that Avon, Connecticut has been doing for like the last 30 years, where they changed their zoning because their town center was being turned into a commercial strip. So they have the beautiful town center with the churches, but so instead of tearing down these 2 historic houses and replacing them with a new modern building, they actually connected them with a wing and turned that whole thing into one larger commercial structure. So again, trying to adapt the old stuff to new uses. And to take a little house and put the commercial businesses in a wing in the back. And so over time, what they've done is combine sort of renovation of these older houses and helping turn those into businesses with closing off curb cuts along the street. So they try to bring as many people as possible into these major curb cuts and then to connect the parking in the rear, which is sort of fundamental if you're trying to keep a commercial strip from forming. Because commercial strips, the trouble is you have driveways, or sometimes 2 driveways for every lot, and then everyone's trying to pull out onto the main street to get back and forth. So what this does is you clean up the street, you preserve as many of those old houses as possible, you remove some of those curb cuts, and so it makes the street then attractive and also better for pedestrians, so you feel like you might actually want to walk up and down this main street again. And still you have the things which the market is demanding for retail and commercial uses, which is a lot of parking right next to the building. This is another old house that was turned into a bank, and they put the drive-through in the little barn in the back. So again, a lot of architects will look at this and wince as being hopelessly twee. You don't want to make a fake drive-through, but it does help this thing fit into that historic community. And then they really promoted a real mix of different sizes and shapes of uses. So you have these very small sort of cottage-style business offices that people have made, larger mixed-use buildings, some interesting architectural experiments, but all within this larger pattern that's designed with a master plan. So that's another key point. So this happened over a long period of time, but they had a master plan that was connected to the zoning, so that when anybody came in, they said, oh yes, we want you to not have a curb cut, but to connect in the back, to clean up the front, and to add to the pedestrian streetscape, etc. So that as this happened over many years, each improvement added to the success of the whole thing as a master plan place. This is one that was done all at once in South Hadley, across from Mount Holyoke College. Some of you may have been there. But this is the old common. And then right here was a whole block that burned down, and they replaced it with this. So here's the common. This was all new. And what they did is they created a master plan, sort of mixed use, but entirely pedestrian block, where you could walk with all these, in between all these different buildings, and all the parking was gathered in the rear in one shared parking lot. And so when you're on the street looking at it or wandering through it, it's just this wonderful series of little pedestrian spaces, places to eat, places to shop. There are some apartments, there's some offices, there's a movie theater, and outside them there's just a place where you might go and just hang out, or you might go there and shop. And it's really well connected to the rest of the community with crosswalks and all the rest. So it's a very interesting model because they did it all at once, but it was very intentionally designed not just to be successful in itself, but to shore up this whole community center, right? This is West Concord. This is kind of a nasty photo, but it sort of represents a nasty period of West Concord when it was the industrial center and the shipping center for the rest of Concord. And there was a series of mills along the river, and this is what it is today. And this is a new building, a mixed-use apartment. This is renovated mills, and this is the main street where they've done a lot of infill. This is one particular new building, which I'll show you. So this is that new building. It's a very simple two-story box, but because it responds to sort of traditional downtown design principles, it seems to fit pretty well. So it's not a very expensive building, but it has a lot of glass on the ground floor and some space for some shops, and then upper floor is apartments. But just a very simple thing which you could see happening incrementally up and down the street as the market grows. And then this is a much larger thing which they did in the back over by the railroad. I think they replaced an industrial building. And this is a mixed-use apartments with I think commercial uses on the ground floor. And this was the image before they built it, and this is actually what was built. So it's kind of, again, a pretty simple, typical kind of apartment with a big box, with apartments on the upper floors, and then a ground floor with a lot of transparent glass to make it possible to look into those businesses. And this is the back of the building, which faces a greenway, where they've been creating paths along the river, and a lot of shady trees with people's balconies on the back of that apartment. So again, they've taken advantage of the closeness this has to the rest of the neighborhood, but also the closeness that it has to the greenway, and then added paths and so on that add to the functionality of that. And this just, by the way, down the road, they've also experimented with, this is one of the first cottage communities in the state, which is a collection of, I think, about a dozen very small houses grouped around a shared open space with a parking lot at one end. So you don't park next to your house, you park your car and then walk down to your house. And they sell for an astronomical amount of money because people really, they don't want a big house, but they want to live in a place that has a sense of place and a lot of character. Now, one of the issues, and we're going to get more into this in the later meetings of the working group, is funding downtown redevelopment. If we get to the other slides, one of them is about the rental rates that you have here, which is about $10 or $11 a square foot on Route 140. which means that if you have like 1,000-foot building, you can rent it out for $10,000 a year, right? $10 times 1,000 square feet. So 10,000 a year then divided by 12 is what? 800 and some dollars a month? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the rent that this market will support. The trouble is that building probably can't be built for less than $250 a square foot. And that means you need to charge a rent that's probably more like $20 a square foot per year. So this is the final economic issue we have with every downtown in the state. Because unless you're in downtown Worcester or downtown Northampton or Boston, where you can charge $35, $40, $50 a square foot, it's very hard to build a building and get your money back out of it. So one of the things we'll talk about later is this idea of community-enabled redevelopment. And this is being practiced successfully by a group of people called Stevens and Associates in Brattleboro. And one of their first projects was buying this beautiful block and renovating it. But they didn't do this based on the rental costs alone. They had this elaborate pro forma. And this, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it talks about there's a certain amount that's paid for by tax credits, the historic tax credits and affordable housing tax credits. There's a certain amount that's paid for by the rent that people are paying on the rental offices and rental spaces. And then some of it is supported by community investment. And this is the kind of thing which we're seeing as increasingly important to making successful redevelopment happen. So you can't just, sometimes you can, but probably you can't just open it up and, even if you gave that land to a developer, they can't build a building and rent it out and get their money back out of it. So it has to be some kind of subsidy that happens. This is another project they're working on in Bennington, where they're redeveloping an entire city block. And so part of it is townhouses and apartments on the upper stories of buildings. There's a medical offices, there's a grocery, there's a couple of other uses. But a key part of this is involving local leadership, business leadership and civic leadership, and local institutions in being tenants in these buildings. So before a developer shows up, they need to know, or before they build something, they need to know that they can rent that space. So the idea here is you get the local hospital, the local community college to actually rent a floor in one of these buildings and say, sign a lease that says we're going to pay for this for 5 years, and therefore the developer can afford to build it. And then to have pre-leased, as you see, pre-leased anchor tenants, sort of eds and meds, which is educational uses and medical uses, which typically can afford a little bit more. To have what they call membership housing, which is actually, you pay rent on a monthly, if I have this right, you pay a monthly rent, like you might pay $2,000 a month for your apartment, but you also buy in. You buy a membership, so you might spend $150,000 buying that apartment, and then you pay rent on top of that. That $150,000 actually pays for the developer to build the apartment, and then when you sell it, you get that $150,000 back from the person who wants to buy it from you. So we won't dwell on this too much, but that's a kind of creative financing strategy that seems to be necessary in a lot of these places. And finally, I want to talk about another idea. This is in Manchester, Connecticut. And it's actually a building that was donated to the city by a local bank with the idea of creating gallery and educational space for a local college that would be paid for by the city, but then leased to the college. And then what they decided to do is combine that with shared co-working space and shared meeting space that anybody could use. And the result is this workspace where it's just designed for meeting, learning, creating, and working. And so essentially on the ground floor there are some large meeting spaces and educational spaces and galleries, which the community college uses. On the upper floors, there are smaller offices and co-working spaces that anybody can use. But what they realize is one of the things that's really important these days is a place where you can go and have a meeting with really good live remote, what do they call it, remote meeting equipment? Because we're all used to having meetings, on our phone, and it never quite works the way you hope. Or even if you have good equipment, that typically could be in an office. So this is to get state-of-the-art meeting, video meeting rooms set up with really good sound, really good communications, so that you could come if you had a business and have a meeting with people in China or whatever you need to do, and really make it reliable, and also have people there on staff who can make sure that it's all working. And then this is one of the co-working spaces, typical thing where you can rent a desk out by the day or the week or the month, or have a small office. This is the gallery space. And then they've sort of integrated with public events. This is a road race through the center of Manchester. So again, this is something we'll think about more in terms of brainstorming for Upton Center, but it needs to be a combination of sort of traditional redevelopment tools, let's build a building and rent it out, with these non-traditional tools, community-supported development, and so on. I'll stop there. We're going back to the other one? Yes. Are there any thoughts about that? Or anybody have other places that they really like and would like to recommend we look at?
St. John's, Vermont, the upper section where the church is at, the Old Town area, they've done a tremendous, amazing job there. And Littleton, New Hampshire, they have what they call the Meadows, which is kind of the big box area, and then they have the old downtown historic area. They've done a really good job. They also put up, there's a river there, which makes a difference, but they did put up a covered bridge just so you can connect the community center, senior center area with the downtown and the library, and not library, excuse me, bookstores, things like that. Those are two towns that I would recommend looking at.
Yes.
I get to travel quite a bit for work, and again, I spent the last week around. And even other places I've been in Virginia, for example, where you have a lot of mixed-use developments that tend to have even more dynamic uses than some of your examples. Have you seen in New England where there's been an ability to get more? One of the things that's a very common theme for those is more housing. It tends to be the ones that are more vibrant, because it just keeps more people on foot in and around the place. I don't know if it's just thoughts. Like I said, I know when we go back to the New England Town Center, it becomes more of a, we tend to go backwards, and we tend to strip the residential component out of it. Because I think in humble terms, I mean, you got to have something to pay the rent per square foot to make it economically viable. Otherwise, don't have a project, even with the best developer.
Well, we're seeing a lot of developments around the state where the town is requiring retail on the ground floor, and then developers saying, fine, as long as I can build 3 or 4 stories of apartments above it, because that's what pays for that retail space.
I don't think we want it to look like, say, downtown Framingham, where if it's the old arcade building, there's
All apartment buildings on
Right.
top and empty businesses on the bottom. I mean, it's,
Even Westboro tried that, and it just didn't really.
That's not really, that's an example of like Westboro, one apartment component and a shopping plaza. I mean, it's why it doesn't work. Like I said, in the last month I've been in one in Richmond, Virginia, and one in Arlington, where, like I said, you don't even want your car, but there's a ton of people out there. There's tons of shops, there's people living there. And like I said, that's kind of what drives that. I don't know, it's just interesting from a standpoint how, like I said, to your point, aesthetically,
it needs to be.
can you, how easy is it for the community to set some aesthetic standards to get, I guess, the mix and the look we're looking for?
And one of the things we've seen in a lot of towns is that you can have multiple aesthetic standards depending on where you are in the downtown. Like most old towns, like West Concord, there's an area that used to be next to the tracks, which still might have the oil company and the automobile service stations and stuff, because that used to be the industrial district of the town, because it was next to where the railroad station was. And now the railroad typically has left, but those kind of ugly uses are still there. But it makes an ideal spot to build some inexpensive fairly high-density housing or whatever you might need that's not really visible from the main street. So you can have one set of standards for the stuff that you see, that you're walking next to, and you can have another set for the stuff that's sort of the back lots, if you will. So we'll be looking for those opportunities here, if they exist. The other thing is, and none of these, of course, we're proposing for Upton Center, right? It's more trying to understand trends and thinking about, well, why did that work in West Concord, and what's the version of that that will work in Upton Center? Because we know we're not going to tear everything down and build 4-story apartment buildings in Upton. But we could build maybe that one apartment above a shop. Maybe that helps to pay the rent for the shop. Who knows?
One follow-up to that is where the state is headed with affordable housing. I mean, the governor's, it's one of his top priorities for good reason. We're probably the second most unaffordable state in the United States of America. And we don't have people staying here. I work for an architectural firm that's national, and our office struggles one of the most because housing. People cannot afford to live here. So nobody's going to come out of college and come here. You can't rent an apartment for $1,000, $1,500 bucks.
Yeah, the whole concept of affordable housing is changing because suddenly, you know, ordinary people with jobs, good jobs, can't afford to live in Boston. So it's like we need affordable market rate housing, and we need affordable housing for people to really need affordable housing. Yes?
I know I'm dreaming, but I wanted to bring up another town. I was thinking of Woodstock, Vermont. That's really dreaming. But just like all the different shops, I mean, not that many, but on a much smaller scale. But kind of keeping the old buildings, but still incorporating new shops. People run their businesses there. There's a common, and they've kept it New England.
That's an excellent segue to our Were there any other key comments? Sorry, go ahead.
A local town that I think has a lot of the same challenges that this area does is Grafton Center. They have a lot of small businesses located in their historical buildings with low-income apartments mixed in with their houses that are too expensive for anybody to afford, all within walking distance to the town center that the community likes to go to. So I think that would be a good example for us to look at.
Yes.
So 2 separate comments. One is to the whole housing and the economy and being the second most expensive state. Massachusetts is the most expensive state in the country when it comes to childcare. So by far, it's at least it's up to around $20 grand a year per child, infant from like newborn to age 4 per year in Massachusetts. So if you add that into, say, like just the average salary and someone trying to live within their means, it's virtually impossible. Then the other side, to my other comment, was one of your first slides was the original house where I think the Nevermind shop is.
Yeah.
So I think it's like we need to go back, focus on what the original buildings, the structures were, the design, and go based on that. Not redesigning our downtown to look like another town, but to design around what it originally was.
What a great segue.
To piggyback on childcare, there's also a big drought in this town of childcare providers, daycares, after school. The public school aftercare program has to close its doors. So maybe if there's a community center, there's an after-school program that they can bus the kids,
So
and then you can get an ice cream cone.
It has to do with regulations in Massachusetts. So it's not necessarily that no one wants to run it. It's that Massachusetts, also the reason it's so expensive is they have the most amount of regulations for child safety and child care, which is why they can charge so much. And they have all these requirements for employees for child care.
Something else we don't have.
One more from Mike.
Thanks. Preservation of the church is very important to me, and I'm wondering if at a future meeting you could present us with some examples how other communities have preserved their churches, how they've developed reuse plans for them. Focus, on a specific type of building, i.e. an old church. So, thank you.
So great. So we wanted to talk about history because we've heard that history is important in Upton Center. So these are slides we showed at the last meeting. Just going to review them quickly, and then we'll talk about history and what's important to you and what you feel like you need to know. So that's Southwick Tavern in the middle of the image that was replaced by the Town Hall. Upton Center in 1888.
Go back to that.
Oh.
Bingo, make it look like that.
All right.
This is George West.
No.
The common. This is what's now 140. So this is the Catholic Church. This is the Common Church. This is the Old Methodist Church, which is now the library.
This is the common, and this is the big sort of. At this time, it was a big dirt area in the middle. And 140 kind of came in as a T instead of making a big gradual curve that you can go 70 miles an hour through. So you want it just like that?
There you go, it's all done.
We'll have to start going to church again.
Well, according to the paper, that's why
All right, that's looking 20 years later on the ground. That's the liquor store.
Turrets and a pizzeria.
Before it got the new siding, it was quite an attractive building.
looks like there was a road down the left side of it.
Was.
North Main Street used to go right by.
Yeah, it's still sort of there. It's like a driveway. Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a driveway.
Like standing in the front of the library.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is amazing about this is if you look at this one, see how there are no trees on the common?
Right.
Right?
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Somebody decided to plant some trees, and it's short in the time scheme of taking pictures. It's long in their lifespan.
You know where the green building is? I think it's a yoga place right now, massage. That building did a really nice job of keeping the old historic look of it, but it's attractive, and you want to go use that building. You want to patronize that that business. So that kind of look
I want to
works.
add to that. I was just there last week. They told me 30 to 40 new customers are coming in a month.
Yeah, she's trying to get more
So
parking.
people will come.
Yeah.
Make things.
It's going to ruin the downtown. Too many people.
All right, so what do we need to know about history to make this process successful? Or what do you already know about history that you feel like is essential?
So what about all the agriculture? The town, I mean, we know certain parts of the town, but there's also, and still in some parts, there's a lot of agriculture farming lines.
Not a lot like Kelly's.
Oh my God.
I mean, but just not necessarily just working farms, but
Recreational agriculture.
recreational agricultural farms.
Like,
No, I'm just talking in general,
no, I was just trying to place it, that's all.
Like, think about the old Sweet William Farm, they still have a horse, do they still have the horses down there?
No,
Or they got
that's a flower farm now.
Okay.
on
But
Park Street?
who own
The five horse?
large horse
Yeah.
farms?
So history, is it important to save every building that exists in Upton right now?
I think it's
No.
too late.
I think what you have to
Right
preserve
now,
is,
there's nothing.
I think
It
what you're
doesn't
trying
look
to,
like that.
I think
You
what you're
need to
trying to preserve is
prioritize.
the essence of what Upton was in the downtown. You know, so what anchors them? You know, malls were built around anchors for a reason. The towns evolved around the town common and a central point for a reason. And so I think Upton Center is framed by the four large buildings that still exist in one way, shape, or form or another. The town-owned church building, the library building, the town hall, and, well, the church, the active church, and then the pizza place.
Right.
Those five buildings, given their size and what goes on in those buildings, sort of is the anchor of the essence of what was, is, and I think people still want Upton to be, or Upton Center to be.
I think we're being a little premature to ask that question. I would rather see us think in terms of what our needs are rather than what the solutions are yet. I think it seems early to be thinking about that. And one thing I don't think we can address in this part of the town, but that we also don't have in town at all, is assisted living. I just wanted to mention that because there's so many people who have grown up their whole lives in this town, and they all have had to leave town when it got to be that time of their lives. So just something in the back of our minds for some other time, but it's a problem. We know a lot of people who have lived in this town and had to leave when they get to that point because there was nowhere for them to go.
And what I said earlier will feed into that. People moving into the 3 developments, 55 plus, they're going to be 85 plus. And we intend this to be in our last home. We're going to need assisted living sometime.
I think you just said speak for yourself.
So I think when you mention what is there to sort of learn or glean from the historical images, I think there's a lot to take away sort of from the architectural vernacular that was already set up. So you can see there's different scales of buildings. When you look at this image, there's more pedestrian scales, there's 3-story, and then more of your architectural elements. So I think taking cue from that, not necessarily saying we're going to replicate what existed there, but understanding that there was an architectural vernacular that was already set up, that had a diversity of scales to accommodate different uses for the town center, and then also this emphasis on the pedestrian realm and really safe, prioritizing people over cars in this town center. I think were key learning lessons that we can move forward as we start to envision what the master plan could be for the future of Upton Center, without necessarily saying that we're going to replicate what existed before.
Just sort of piggyback on that. If we were to put like new buildings in that space that has the Nevermind shop in the old arcade block, it would be nice, especially with the expectation that we would want to put a mixed-use building in there with apartments, if we could, if not replicate, at least sort of evoke the style that was there before. Right now, because that building has been so degraded over time, even though part of the structure is still there, there's nothing that sort of evokes the old way that it was, and it would be really nice if we could encourage whatever development that happened to sort of bring that back, even though it would be like a new structure or whatever actually built there.
Or maybe match the town hall.
Right,
Or
some sort of,
complement.
like you said,
Complement.
be in the same vernacular architecturally so that it didn't jar.
Well, it's an interesting question. I like what you said about focusing on, not on solutions, but really focusing on needs at this stage. So why do we need this stuff? But really focusing on needs at this stage. So why do we need this stuff? Why do we need history or historic buildings at all? They're not very efficient. They cost a lot to heat. We can make modern buildings that are very beautiful.
It keeps
with a
the
lot
character.
of vegetation.
Keeps the character of
What is it about the character that's important? Why do we need that?
It's an identity.
It's our heritage.
Where we came from.
It's an identity.
It's who we are.
It's pretty.
I honestly think if it's done well, that keeps money coming. I mean, someone recently visited from Washington State and drove through Grafton to get to our house and was like, wow, that was so beautiful. Some people never, we take for granted that we grow up in these towns, but some people never get to see the towns like this.
Having lived in the Pacific Northwest for 20 years till we came back here, I can relate to what you say. There's something very, very singular about New England towns that really does set them apart from the rest of most of the rest of the country. There's a development up in, where's that friendlies on the road here? Marlborough. And it's a huge new shopping area, and you go there and it could be anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. It does not belong in New England. It stands out like a sore thumb. So we came back to New England because we wanted to come home. But that's what makes New England special. It doesn't have the mountains and it doesn't have the, it doesn't have the Puget Sound and that, but it has this fabulous architecture. And that's really, and that's its heritage.
I don't think you need 18th century looking buildings. 19th. Grafton just keeps coming up as an example. The buildings look more modern, but they still fit as New England buildings. And the same in Norfolk, I'll come back to that. The new buildings don't look like the Northwest. They look like New England, but they also look contemporary.
You know, I can go downtown in Upton today, and even though it has changed, and changed since I've been here, and I've seen pictures that it changed before I came here, I can still go to the Historical Society and look at pictures and say, oh yeah, okay, well, I can recognize that, even though it's changed a little bit, or they used to have these huge cattle shows in the Common. You know, you just have this sense of belonging, a place of the heart, I guess, or as somebody used another term before, but you still, it's Upton. And if you, as somebody said, retain the anchors, excellent idea, but also, look, we're kind of focusing on just that common area, and look just a little bit beyond at the fringes, too, because you can preserve what you have and come up with some adaptive uses, which is what saves old buildings, but you can also reach out a little. Beyond the VFW, there's a space, at one point in time, they talked a little about a little mini mall. Okay, what's going on with that? That kind of died. Should we look at that parcel? I know there's another parcel we've talked about looking at. And let's talk about the traffic, and let's see, I think the plan you have for the design of how you want the streets to be and where you want them to come out and how you want to avoid all this congestion in one place, that's going to kind of dictate, too, your space and what you can do in it.
Right.
So I think it's really nice to have something that's aesthetically pleasing and beautiful and all these things, but I think it's also really important to understand that demographics are changing in the town, that a lot of people are being pushed out to the 495 belt to commute into Boston, and what's going to keep me in this town is having a place where I can recreate, I want to spend my dollars here. I don't want to go to Hopkinton. I don't want to go to Grafton Center to spend that money. So I think a lot of this comes down to economic generation and vitality for the town, and really using this sort of commuter community that's the reality of most of the people that work in this town, and leveraging that for the vitality and the use of the town instead of spending my dollars somewhere else.
I actually work in Hopkinton, and the amount of people I've had to explain, yeah, Upton is that little town with a terrible road that we just keep patching because we're going to eventually have it replaced. A lot of them didn't even realize that they actually are passing through Upton. They have no idea what the name of the town is.
Big sign. We've renovated 2 old buildings in Upton. The Town Hall, which was built in 1884, and Mill House, which used to be the place where straw hats were made. And at one time, that was the largest manufacturer of straw hats in the country. And that building has been renovated, repurposed for housing. So when you go into Mill House and when you go into the Town Hall, because it was an old building and because it looks and feels like a new place, even though it's an old building, it gives you a different feeling than when you walk into a typical office building in Boston or any other city. So you feel more of an attachment to the building and to the place because it's a repurposed building. So there is certainly some benefit in being able to, I think, repurpose old buildings, as long as you can come up with a viable new purpose for the building. Renovating for the sake of renovating doesn't really make a lot of sense. If there's a viable purpose for renovating an old building, then if you do a good job of it, I think it can have a very positive impact on the community.
Is there any way to get information on retention, like business retention in these newly redeveloped areas? What are the, identifying the anchor tenants, the types of business, and then talking, whether the town, I'm sure the towns know which businesses are successful in the downtown area. I think what happens is that it's all pie in the sky, that there's an idealism that here in this process that's intrinsic to it, but that we need to balance it with the economic realities of if we're going to put businesses downtown, how do we retain those businesses? information is lacking. So some of the tools we need, some of the information we need, we don't have.
Well, to your point, Gene, I think as a town, we do a horrible job of welcoming new businesses to Upton. How many of you have been to Stephanie's yet? Okay? Do you even know that it's there? Okay?
Only based off of Facebook.
So when a new business comes to Upton, it happens so rarely, we should be ecstatic and we should be celebrating and doing things, and we don't. And I think that's a key problem that we have in getting new businesses to stay here.
I think she's going to need parking.
Yes, yes.
There already is parking. Yeah, I mean, she needs it now, but I mean, if you try to get in there on a weekend, yeah, good luck.
But that's because there are a lot of people there.
No, I got it. I mean, we used to go to Grafton.
Yeah.
She told us she'd move in here, that's all. She could be right down the street.
Yeah, but nobody knew that she opened even. I mean, it was like a secret, and it's
pretty crowded for a secret.
It's a problem that we need to fix.
Nobody goes there.
I think once we invest in we put in a great library and we put in a great senior center, then there's going to be reason for people to stay and have a meal and stay and have a coffee shop. But there's nothing there now. We need to invest and then it'll be worthwhile.
We have some people who've been waiting to be heard.
So yeah, everybody's wondering like what do we have to offer to make people come to Upton. So I'm sure everybody has seen at least once or twice Chronicle Main Streets and Back Roads of New England. Well, they actually featured Upton last year, the year before. They did a whole thing on the town, which was actually pretty cool. And I can't remember how far back they went, but they basically just went through town and just showing about how far we've come and that we are the fastest growing town in Massachusetts. And so it was pretty cool. So you can actually go online and probably find the archive and watch it.
I have a question. Are there already functioning businesses in town that have come forth? Because I have a friend that has a business that I feel like I heard could have gone, put in a name that she, like, do you guys have a list of people in town that already run businesses that are possibly interested in putting their business downtown?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that too.
Oh, and
We have developers
Yes,
that
yeah, I'm
approach
sorry.
There are developers interested in in a revitalized downtown, but it's, again, Upton, for better or worse, has a reputation of having a very challenging, having a very challenging zoning board of appeals and a very challenging process for doing anything in town that's at all different than what already exists.
I mean,
So
are there any functioning businesses in town that are interested in moving to better spaces?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah.
The lady that owns the flower shop, Petal and Crumb, she's been wanting to move to a bigger space because she's in her garage right now. So that's an example of
I
an
just didn't know
existing
if there were
business
more. Right.
that wants to move to another space.
We don't have any buildings to lease them.
But we don't have any place, there's no place for her to
We don't have a
go.
market to give to anyone. Right? We have land.
But going back to Gene's comment about the zoning board being difficult or its reputation, whether it's real or imagined, doesn't matter. It is. What is the town doing? What's the town administration? And I don't mean you necessarily, Mr. Manager, but the selectmen and the zoning board. If that's a problem, and they've recognized it, why is there a reluctance? Is there a reluctance to change the rule set to eliminate that perception?
That's why we're here. Okay, so the real answer to your question is that's why we're here. That's why the selectmen formed the EDC. It's why we're functioning the way we are in a kind of a step-by-step incremental process. And we felt that the incremental process began with a common vision that, as Peter will, as we get towards the end of this, we'll start looking at, what does a common vision mean in terms of zoning? What does it mean in terms of business attraction? What does it mean in terms of regulatory process? All of those things will have to be developed out of this process. So this is first.
I would disagree with you in that if you have a bureaucracy, you can change the bureaucracy simultaneously to laying out a long-term, what everyone seems to be agreeing, a long-term vision for the downtown. Because you can change the zoning laws probably, relatively speaking, in a fairly short amount of time.
It takes a 2/3 town meeting vote to change zoning.
Okay, so I would tell you that if it's properly presented to town meeting, and I will tell you this effort, when it was presented at the town meeting in October or whatever, was a disaster.
Exactly.
It was not laid out to where the people in the room, and I count myself in that, understood what you were trying to do. The meeting you had in January was very helpful. But if you've got a entrenched bureaucracy, you can start working on that now and laying the groundwork simultaneous to what does the vision need to look like.
Well, it's a good point. We did promise to get you out of here by 9. I want to be sensitive to that. Well, I don't think there's any ball games on tonight. Usually we're trying to get home and see a Red Sox game. But I think changing the bureaucracy is one of those things that might be necessary, but it's sort of a matter of opinion. Changing zoning is often a very strong matter of opinion. So what we're going to try to do is we get closer to having this, or once we have a vision, then we'll sit down and say, well, what are the barriers to making that vision a reality? Some of those might be, we have to change zoning in certain ways, and hopefully all of the visioning and stuff that goes into this will make it clear why we need to change the zoning in certain ways, and people will see the reason and say, oh, okay, that's our experience, and people can follow the narrative, then it's easy to change the zoning. If they haven't been involved and they don't understand it, they'll vote it down just because. And changing the bureaucracy may be one of those action items that comes out at the end. But we need to, just like with zoning, you don't just throw everything out. You think about what is a particular thing we need to tweak to make this work better. Maybe it's the format of planning board hearings. Maybe it's some other thing that we don't have to change everything, but we need to figure out what it is that's forming barrier to keeping the developers from doing their thing, keeping a landowner or just a small business person from succeeding, and to tweak those things and have a very intentional sort of narrative that says this is why we're doing this. It's because we discovered X. And we're never going to get to where we want to be unless we change this point. But we don't have to change everything. We have to change this. So that's kind of where we're going. And I think earlier somebody talked about going slowly. This is a slow planning process. I mean, we're doing it within 4 months, but it's kind of the idea of going slow to go fast. We've worked with a lot of towns that get a grant to do the zoning, and we come in, we change the zoning, we come in and present it, and we get hammered because nobody knows what we're talking about. So the idea is we slow down, we say, what do we really want to have happen? Why do we want to have it happen a certain way? So in this discussion here, all of you at town meeting in May are going to say, oh, I understand why they're asking for historic design guidelines for those buildings, because we had a discussion about how important that is to the character and sense of place in this community. And that's going to be good not just because it's pretty, but because it's good for business, et cetera, et cetera. So we're building that shared understanding that's going to make it possible to make the changes we need to change later. I hope. That's the idea. So at the next meeting, we're going to continue this discussion. I think between now and then, we're going to package up some of the slides and send them out so you can start looking at some of the details, because there's a lot of stuff we didn't present about the local economy, local demographics, and so we'll send that out to you as homework, and then we'll come to the next meeting ready to talk about what all those facts mean and what are, again, what are our shared values as they relate to the center, so sort of create a framework for moving forward. Does that make sense? Do you have anything we need to tell people?
I have a question. You said that we were like a liaison to the rest of the community. What should we be saying to people? What do you want us to be saying?
There's this incredibly important, exciting event happening on Saturday, March 23rd. You should all come.
Be there.
It's going to start at 10 o'clock, so you can have a relaxed breakfast at home, and then come to the meeting.
To give people context, this community has been through an awesome master plan in 2005, which unfortunately we can implement unfortunately. This community has a great planned village development bylaw. We really do. This is the second time at the plate for this community. We feel, and Gene's smiling because he knows what I'm talking about, we had 250, 300 town residents, mostly younger people who had come to the community like myself 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, beginning to start a family. And we filled that town hall floor up full of people, and there was excitement. And unfortunately, we have a rail yard instead of a planned village development. So this community really needs to rally, especially the younger people, to show up to town meetings, to show up to town hall, take a little time to get involved in a committee. We're not asking you to, like, you know, do it 20 hours a week like people like I do. But that's what needs to happen. The younger people and even of all ages need to create a little more of a buzz that this is going to be a positive thing and a good thing.
So, a quick question: will the members of this committee that have volunteered, will our information be put in the crier or like somewhere so people can know who's on the committee?
We can talk about that. If you want that, please send in a message to the EDC rather than, deluging any one person. If it gets to the EDC and there's enough people that think that they want to be identified as liaisons or ambassadors, what have you, then let us know. But I don't want to give out information that people don't want given out.
Have you seen that be successful in the past? Have you ever done something like that? Where a committee, we're all volunteers.
There's very frequently there's a steering committee or working group that's usually it's appointed by the mayor or the town council or something to do something. It's kind of unusual to have this many volunteers just serving as a collective working group. And I guess so. The answer is yes and no. I've seen it done with smaller groups. I haven't seen it done with a group this large.
Without naming names, you can just bring this list. To show that there's a cross-section of the community represented here and a lot of different interests going into this. And we need to manage town meeting. We need to be able to make sure that treat it as a political campaign, town meeting. But a good start is to say, yeah, your neighbours represent you because of this huge list here.
And don't make no mistake about it. This is a political campaign.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. This is all about the politics of development and what we want the town to look like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years from now. Because the kind of zoning, the kind of things that we're talking about in the master plan, this isn't 5 years from now. It's going to be concrete in the ground. This is a vision that's guided by zoning and proper planning that takes the town from here to there in the vision. And that there is a long way away. So no one should be impatient. They need to understand that what they're working on is, the beginning and the nascence of a redevelopment of downtown. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But your input will guide planning board, will guide Concom, will guide zoning board, will guide the selectmen. So you have a very strong voice in how you see this town developing. And you need to get other people to engage and understand that that's what we're talking about. That we're talking about what do people want to see this town look like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the road.
What would be useful is if something like that could be put into a little blurb.
Yep.
I'm an admin on a Facebook page, and you did a great job at the beginning going out to community groups, and each group put it up on their listserv and websites. So if you had like a blurb and maybe a couple of historic pictures or whatever, and you could send it out as sort of a PR about the March meeting, I'd certainly share it on our Facebook page, and I'm sure there are others who would share too.
Share the rocket.
I wonder if it would be useful to have sort of what came out of this meeting, maybe in the town crier, so everyone from town could know how this is progressing. Because that's the thing, that people just didn't know what was going on before. So we've got this group, and I don't know if what comes out of here, we should let people know. So we're not getting individual phone calls so much, but just that this, quite a bit happens at these meetings, and maybe that's what people would want to know. I don't know.
But I also think that the reason that we're trying to ensure that you guys are representative is so that you use your own social networks to spread information, and mostly to listen to your neighbors and your friends and the people you talk to. Listening is really important. Your job is not just to tell us your opinion, but to tell us the opinion of your neighbors, and to synthesize all that in your head and come and be able to speak about it clearly and succinctly. This is democracy, right? It's not just electing somebody else and having them vote for, make decisions for you. It's talking to each other in a group and having the best choice arise from the wisdom of the group.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't say that.
Yeah, but I'd like to underline that request for a well-worded summary of the vision and how we come about it that we can then pass on. Because we got 58 units, but we can send this information to you right away. But I'd like you to word it.
Or the
So you
EDC
want
to put it together.
You want a summary of the process? or-
Process and the conclusions reached today. I think there are a few things you can synthesize from it already.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to synthesize anything from today because I feel like it's a very preliminary discussion. But I've heard a lot of different
So we just say
opinions.
preliminary.
Some of which-
That we have a well-represented
Yeah.
cross-section of the town.
And our next public meeting is on the Saturday.
Sounds great.
And this is what we want going on.
Yeah, no, I think we could put something.
Yeah.
I bet if
It's
we
always-
serve some alcohol.
I was thinking muffins.
Well, that's just to make sure, just to go out to the town and say that we're well represented prior to that town hall meeting, so we're not trying to convince people there that we were well represented. There be no going into it that we weren't.
Yeah.
Right.
So 2 points. One is knowledge is power. All of our bylaws, everything, they're all published. So we have such a massive amount of information to go through in such a short period of time. I think if we're just aware of what the zoning laws are or what the bylaws are going into this, we won't be reinventing the wheel and setting ourselves back weeks on end and fighting over things, then knowing what a bylaw, what zoning bylaw is what, can maybe at least keep us on this, straight track.
Right, well, that's where this shared fact-finding process is going to continue at the next meeting. As I said, between now and then, we'll send you out like our summary of the zoning, and like we did an analysis of which parcels comply with zoning now and which ones don't, that kind of thing. So we'll send that out, you can take a look, and then come prepared to jump in with questions at the next meeting, which is what day?
Don't ask me.
March
4th.
March 4th.
Another Monday?
Yeah.
That's going to be
The other point I wanted to make is if you don't have charter cable, you have no access to the Upton cable network. So if you cut the cord, or you're using DirecTV's satellite, you do not get the Upton cable network.
A footnote on that, this will be on YouTube as well.
Will it be on the website? Will it be on is there a link from the website?
It will be on local access, it will be on YouTube. Eventually.
Yes, half a day tomorrow. 12:15, 12:10, something like that. Is that a good plan?